You're listening to an IOE podcast.
Powered by UCL Minds.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Research Ethics Conversation series, where we explore the challenges, questions, dilemmas, and values that guide us in making responsible research. I'm Hakan Ergül, Associate Professor of Media Studies at the Institute of Education, University College London, and my guest today is Dr. Michelle Cannon. Michelle is lecturer on MA Digital Media Education route at UCL Institute of Education, and she has a wealth of experience in creative media production in educational setting. And she's also leading the digital storytelling course at postgraduate level. So welcome, Michelle, and thank you so much for joining me in this podcast.
Hello, Hakan. Pleased to be here.
Thank you. And so happy to have you. Really, I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Could you give us, Michelle, a sense of your teaching and research, first of all, just to start with, and how you connect these two to each other?
Sure, yeah. Well, I research digital making, mainly with children and young people. And my original research, my doctoral research, was around filmmaking and editing with primary school children and children in early secondary education. And this was in relation to new media literacies, as we used to call them, not so new anymore. This was an attempt to try to enlarge the idea of literacy so that it would encompass and include the audiovisual and multimodal media making. So on the basis that reading and writing, important as it is perhaps not enough in the world we live in anymore. So yes, it was about literacy and trying to expand what that means.
Right. That's so interesting. Actually, I was just wondering whether, you had a sort of professional work experience before we doing similar kind of things at the schools and working with the children. And how did that transition look like for you? What were the challenges bringing that previous experience into the school setting? And what were the couple of sort of the dilemmas or like ethical issues that you come across, and how have you, gone about them?
Well, I think when you're working with children in a school as what was called a creative media practitioner, I was given a lot of freedom because nobody really knew what that was. And at the time, it was about using iPads and uploading to the website. And I was running the website as well because I used to be a web designer. So it was tricky to negotiate the issues around the content that was going on the website. It was a bit of a Wild West territory, and we're talking in the kind of, I don't know, something like the late 2000s. And I did my doctorate around 2013, 14, around that time. And even then, just over 10 years ago, it was still a little bit Wild Westish when it came to issues of consent. It was down to the head teacher's say-so what could go up, and largely it was like just it'll be fine. Obviously it's not like that anymore, and rightly so. And there's a lot more nuance going on around that now.
Right. And talking about that aspect, actually, that nuance, I think probably I was wondering if you're referring to the sort of accumulation of the knowledge in that field as well. That we have now a better understanding on what does it mean to introduce those digital technologies in the educational setting. So, lots of main questions were already replied. And so we have the knowledge and we are trying to incorporate that into our practices at the school. But, tell us a bit more about this aspect of creativity. Particularly, I'm concerned about, or like sort of curious about that. What does it mean to work with children in a sort of creative field? Because I think, at least me, when I was working with them in the past, I had this question always in my mind: to what extent I'm accommodating or assisting them so that, you know, their creativity can manifest in a most sort of richest, deepest level, or to what extent I'm actually sort of limiting at the same time. So how do you strike the balance while introducing how doing things without really limiting their creativity?
Well, I think this is a really fascinating point, and there are no easy answers. It is a balancing act between setting creative constraints and allowing them access to an expression of their understanding of their own world. So the bridge that me and my colleagues here on the program on which I work, especially the likes of Lucia Rodriguez and Pauline Van Broekman, John Potter, and we absolutely encourage the incorporation of popular cultural motifs, popular cultural texts, popular cultural understanding. And this, to us, rooted in cultural studies, is the bridge, you know, the bridge to children, young people's world, and how we can encourage them more reflexive understanding of that through creative production.
Right. But have you come across any moment, for instance, that, you know, when you're introducing a sort of task or like creative practice that you think that you'll be doing together with the children, but one or two might have different ideas or sort of, you know, come up with another kind of, you know, methodology? You know, I don't want to do that. I would like to do rather this. So how do you sort of negotiate that kind of wishes from your participants and then what you would like to do with them?
Yeah, especially filmmaking, because what they're kind of fed, if you can call it that, is largely, you know, regular mainstream Hollywood fare. And at the moment, that revolves around Marvel comics and what have you. So clearly, they would want to incorporate Supermen with special powers, or, you know, some kind of chase scene and guns and fights. I mean, this is not just a gendered thing either. So I think one way around that is the business of having them watch stuff that they don't normally watch, and having them watch it with a particular cinematic perspective. In other words, just give them one thing to look at, which could be foreground and background. So, you know, you give them a kind of cinematic language trope to watch out for. And so they have a reason to watch it with purpose and can feed back on that. And I find that the more that they watch unfamiliar texts or films, clips even, I mean, they don't have to be, you know, full-length movies, just clips or short films or animations, then, you know, it opens their mind to what they implicitly understand. It's always staggering.
Right. I'm very curious about that particular movement. You know, how do they react to that? You know, that kind of unconventional sort of narratives or ways of narrating things that is not really very common on YouTube or like on their sort of on-demand television. What's basically the reaction? Are they fascinated by this new way of, you know, doing things on screen, or, you know, do they keep silent for a second before they come up with their sort of views? How do they react?
You know, Hakan, it kind of depends on the pedagogic conditions in which you've set it up. You know, if you just sit them down and say, right, we're all going to watch this foreign language animation for 5 minutes, that will reward or not. But if you have them just listen to a soundtrack of it and guess and imagine what might be happening, and then they all talk about it, and then they watch it, then that's an entirely different interaction.
That's very true. Okay, well, that sounds really fascinating. I would like to explore more on that. But I was wondering whether, you know, all this experience and, you know, the watching movies, creating, sort of co-creating the narratives as the rest of it, that you have only the head of it, but, you know, and then you complete the rest of the picture in front of you. That's really very creative. And I love your concept of creative constraints. I think that's really one of the sort of enriching pedagogical approaches. Can we classify that what you do with the children in terms of filmmaking, and then what you teach at the same time at the postgraduate level, all together, sort of a field of digital storytelling, different forms of it, different there are formulaic genre differences between the two. But I wonder whether there's a kind of broader rubric on the top of that, that's all of those actually as kind of digital storytelling. What would you say about that?
I've said this a few times in various capacities, but I largely use the similar creative exercises with primary school children as I do with MA students, because it's likely that the students, the learners you have in front of you, haven't done this kind of thing before. And it's accessible. And it's accessible in ways technologically, because we're much more attuned and have access to digital technologies, even 10-year-olds and under now, but also the cultural capital on which they can draw is a reservoir of knowledge and understanding that's untapped, in my view. And I think it's important to give them some kind of steer. If it's an MA student, you might give them examples to draw on. If these are younger students in primary or early secondary or whatever, then you might give them films to watch, but also some kind of materials to work with. So that would come in. That would be part of the creative constraint, right? You must use these materials. For example, in the recent digital storytelling MA module, we had our students doing something called 2D digital animation on the theme of environmental collapse and the climate catastrophe, and how that might affect issues, ecological issues. And so we brought in, bits of flowers and grass and whatever else from our gardens, had them bring in some rubbish. And we said, right, each table, you've got to do something with that in response to this poem. So they each had a verse of poetry to illustrate. And that poetry, incidentally, was made in about 30 seconds with AI. Now that comes with its own ethical issues and all sorts of another conversation. But for our purposes, to get to have them think creatively and they had an hour to do this in, that was a really interesting, concise and pithy kind of creative exercise that could be done with children as well. I've done that with nursery rhymes, for example, with them.
Right, wonderful. I'm going to come back to that cultural context, that I'm really curious about your view on that. But before that, let's talk a little bit about more this digital storytelling as a sort of quite a buzzword. It's quite a popular thing now. I mean, just when I started learning about digital storytelling, let's say 15 years or so ago, it was quite new. I needed to explain to people what I'm doing before I started that, even the colleagues in the media studies field as well, because it was referring to a particular kind of movement, if you like, sort of activist kind of movement. People were producing digital stories in a workshop environment, tackling the issues of social inequalities, the gender sort of the issues and all kinds of societal issues, whatever that is relevant at the moment, migration, refugee crisis. So you name it, in order to sort of raise the voices of those that are, usually unheard. So that was a particular genre serving to that in that sense. But now, fast forward today, after 15 years or so, when I say digital storytelling, we don't have that consensus anymore. What do you think about that? Everybody understands it in a different way, because probably what you were referring to in terms of popular culture. What's your view on that?
Well, digital storytelling, isn't it just storytelling? I mean, it gets back to what I was saying before about the business of new media literacies. It's just literacy. Arguably, yes, there's media literacy, there's all sorts of literacies, but for me, it's just literacy. For me, it's just storytelling, which I think in people's embrace of storytelling, I'm not sure that the word digital is that useful anymore in this post-digital paradigm in which we're living. So, maybe it has just lost its meaning, because everyone can do it. It's something that perhaps needs a little bit more diversification. I'm opting to kind of move back and just say, yes, the umbrella is storytelling, and let's have lots of diversification within that, one of which is multimodal or polymedial, which is another word I came across just the other day. And it's part and parcel of this, I think, move towards embracing media as a valid form of expression for children and young people. It's just a bit of a shame that it's not being embraced in curricula.
Right. And talking about the sort of, the producers or like the students are expressing their own, experiences, their thoughts, the views. Still, when I hear about the storytelling, there is this sort of core or essence of it that sounds to me, at least, kind of intimate. That is different than sort of post-produced sort of cinematic or like filmic genres that we used to seeing on the screen, for instance. There is something amateur into that. There is something more personal, if you like.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the post-digital, what I would count as one of the characteristics of post-digitality is that personal investment. And this, of course, brings along with it a whole host of ethical considerations. The more you invite the personal, the more you invite ethical implications and a whole load of conversations that need to go on around that before indeed you embark on any kind of research or indeed teaching.
Right. Actually, you just, come to the point that I wanted to explore further your experience about that. There is a research part of it, let's say in the school settings with the primary school, secondary school children, but there's also the teaching part of it where, some of the ethical questions might be common, actually, in a way, because exactly as you have mentioned, we are talking about something personal, something might be private in a way, difficult to share in the presence of others, but also difficult to share, to upload and share with the millions on the other side. So what does it take for a researcher like yourself or a sort of teaching staff like yourself to prepare for that kind of ethical questions? And how do you do that preparation?
Well, we're learning. And, certainly within this module that I've been talking about, digital storytelling, we've just finished the second iteration of that. And it's becoming more and more apparent to our team, I think, that we have to put time and effort into the levels of consent, the kind of granularity of that consent form in order to be able to show their material wherever we like. I don't think it's enough now just to say, oh, tick this box if you're okay with us showing your movie in conferences or in educational settings. Because the likelihood is, as indeed we were talking about prior to this discussion, some of the materials might stretch beyond those boundaries, and there needs to be some kind of attention given to the duration of this consent, options for going back to the said participant, and many more boxes to tick or not tick with reference to their consent to how this material might be used in another 10, 20 years' time. I had a particular, there was a particular occasion in a recent research project, which is the Play Observatory research project, which looked at instances of play during the pandemic. There's a lot I could say about this. It was run by a very small team of people, some people from Sheffield University, and led by John Potter. And we invited many uploads of data which instantiated children's play during the pandemic in all sorts of formats. There was a minefield of ethical implications around this, which would probably entail a whole other conversation in and of itself. But one particular ethical dilemma or an ethical issue that I came across that I was dealing with was with a family whose son uploaded a film, and which was a fantastic film called Park Police, which involved this young 10-year-old filmmaker filming his toddler sister pretending to be a policeman in a park, policing the picnics. And it was hilarious, I have to say. But their mother, the mother of these two children, was particularly concerned about the toddler's rights, you know, in years to come, and how would she feel about this film being, you know, everywhere. It's not everywhere at the moment, I have to say, but still, it's out there, and who really can police those borders of the texts that are uploaded in particular places? If we show it in a conference, which is what we did, and indeed the young filmmaker introduced it and contributed to this seminar, then it's kind of out there. There's not much we can do about that. So we did what we could, and just to get back to your issue of what can be done, I just think the time and effort and care and attention that you take to ethics, especially with children, is in direct proportion with the richness of what it's possible to gain from the process. So after many emails, much toing and froing, it was agreed that we could use this material. So yeah, I mean, it really is about how much care, time, and attention you put into those early processes, which is no longer just tick that box and it's all fine, you know.
Right. I mean, actually, this is fascinating, really. You know, it brings me back to the main insight in terms of, you know, how we understand ethics in our research context as a sort of integral to the research. It's not something that you do start before the sort of research, you start your fieldwork and tick box, as you said, and then you go ahead and forget about all these questions before, but it's a dynamic thing.
Yeah, it's ongoing. Yeah.
Exactly. Just like the consent itself. I mean, somebody might be giving you the consent at the beginning, but the things might change. Sort of positionality of the person might change, and it might create some new ethical questions. So of course, it's literally impossible to sort of give an answer, clear answer to every potential ethical, but we are trying to sort of prevent as much as we can and minimize the potential risks. So I would like to come to that point, actually. Now, let's go back to the classroom, but this time let's go back to the MA module that you're leading, the digital storytelling and education module, which is fascinating. And I just regret that I cannot be the part of it as a student. I would love to just sit there and do the task together with you guys. But I'm thinking that, you know, we have a sort of diverse cohort in a way that people are coming all different parts of the world in a way. And their understanding of sort of to what extent they are free to say things might differ from one to another in a way individually, but also in terms of the cultural context, the society that they come from. Even if, for instance, I'm just imagining a student giving a consent for the things that he or she shared in the classroom with the digital storytelling might sort of have some implications later on at the same time. To what extent this is creating a constraint in terms of the students' creativity, and how are you tackling that in the classroom?
Okay. Just one small thing before I answer that is that I co-lead the module with Lucio Rodriguez. So just to sort that out. Well, yes, I'm glad you raised this, because our particular context on the digital storytelling, it's called digital storytelling and education, in fact. We must remember this. It's something that bothers me quite a lot, actually, because on this module, and indeed across the whole program of modules, critical thinking is a massive part of what we do, what we encourage, what we embrace, and what we value. Critiquing the status quo, exploding assumptions, not taking the common sense as, what can never change. This is a huge part of what we do. And the idea of creating stories that are critical could be problematic for certain students. And we're aware of this. It doesn't stop us continuing to our kind of mission to hone critical thinking. But we have to be mindful of there's sometimes, what should we say, they can be compromised even if they were to actually talk about it, never mind inscribe in media the stories that might be in their heads. So what we try and do is give them options to, in terms of classroom practice, what we do is we use Mentimeter a lot, which is anonymous commentary. So, people can say what they like, but we don't know who said it, and it's coming up in real time on the screen. It's one pragmatic kind of way of inviting opinion and commentary on what we might be talking about. We also offer a range of thematic content that they can engage with. So it's not always about critiquing, the drift towards authoritarian policies and practices around the world. It's all, you can probably nearly always get back to that, but we kind of offer a range of different themes that they can grapple with. And we actually say to them, you choose a social issue that is of value to you. It doesn't necessarily need to be something that we've been concentrating on in this module. And what we have been concentrating on is LGBTQ issues, gender discrimination, the climate catastrophe, environmental concerns, ecological breakdown, and then bridging across to extractive practices, using the Earth's resources. I mean, these are the themes that we would like to have them think about, but we give them flexibility really on what they can actually talk about and feel comfortable talking about.
Right. I think that's the kind of approach that can transform the classroom environment into a sort of empowering, encouraging, than limiting in a way. They must be feeling pretty much at home when they realize that, they're sort of, potentially sort of the critical views can be anonymous so that they can share. So there are different tools that I understand that you're using and introducing in the classroom environment to make it as much inclusive as possible.
Yeah.
Right. Well, fantastic. Really, really illuminating experience and then insights. Michelle, are there sort of any, 2-3 tips that you would like to give the anyone teaching, particularly digital storytelling in an educational setting, that they can, bring into their own research or like teaching?
I embrace the idea of the teacher as the inexpert. So I would really advocate for teachers not to think that they need to know everything. By no means do they need to know everything. You open yourselves to learning from the potential expert in the room on certain, perhaps involving technology, perhaps, but other issues of content and themes, popular culture. I am by no means any expert on popular culture, and you learn from your learners. So just to be bold enough to step into that space and give the learners the agency, give them the creative constraints, give them the technology. You don't even know, you need to really teach probably the app that they might be using. We use a lot of 2D animation. We invite the craft work. We de-privilege the technology indeed in the classroom. The technology that is just the tool, and you probably know about that if you don't press that button, So you just give them the agency and make the project open-ended. Let's try and not have an objective for the classroom, for the lesson. let's say we don't really know what they're going to come up with, and we don't know how it's all going to be, and there's going to be a little bit of chaos, and that's fine. So yeah, embrace the certain amount of chaos. And it is a little bit of a balancing act, but it will reap rewards because that's what gives the learner the agency.
Right. Well, that sounds like a fantastic journey to go together in a way, collaborate with your students in an equal level without knowing every single step that you might take.
Yeah.
But make it happen together in a way, in that environment. Well, that sounds fascinating. Michelle, thank you so much for your insights and experience that you shared with us.
Okay.
I really
Pleasure.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for watching, and hope to see you in the next episode in this research ethics conversation series. Thank you.